Yeah, good to see so many of you. It's the second week of our new theme, so if you weren't here last week, then I really recommend checking out Vidyanya's introduction to the theme. And this is the second talk in that theme, The Path to Awakening. And we've called it Making Our Mind Up. And I think probably a fair few of you might recognise that title from a song. I used to watch Top of the Pops too, so although I'm still quite young and fair, I do know that this was a song and that there were dancers that ripped their skirts off halfway through. So I'm not wearing a skirt, I'm not going to do the routine, but I just thought I'd acknowledge that before we begin. So yeah, we're making our mind up tonight. So this whole theme, The Path to Awakening, is looking at a text called the Bodhicharyavatara, and I've got that written down here. So the Bodhicharyavatara, it's a text from the 8th century that was written by a monk called Shantideva, and there are copies available in the library and to buy. Here it is. So the Bodhicharyavatara translates roughly as a guide to the path of awakening. So Bodhi is awakening or enlightenment. Charya is like the path or the way, and avatara is like a guide. So it's like a guide to the way to awakening, or a guide to the path of awakening. And it's designed, I read about it online today. I mean, I do know about it other than reading about it online. But I was reading an essay, and I quite like this. Somebody said that it's kind of there for people who aren't necessarily on the path when they begin to hear this text, but they're motivated to enter the path by hearing the text or by reciting it or by studying it. So it's there to inspire us to start our journey, to start our spiritual journey. And it's helping us to decide to enter that path. And the path that I'm talking about is a particular path within Buddhism called the Bodhisattva path or the Bodhisattva ideal. So through engaging with the Bodhisattva ideal, we're looking to live as a Bodhisattva would. And Bodhisattva roughly translates as awakening being. So somebody who's dedicated their whole lives to awakening, but not just for their own benefit, but for the benefit of all beings. So this Bodhicharyavatara text is showing us the guide to the way of the Bodhisattva, the way to dedicate our whole lives to the awakening of ourselves, but also of other people. It has this altruistic element to it. And in a way, there's no separation. If we're dedicated to our own awakening, then we will be concerned with the awakening of other people. And in the Bodhicharyavatara, it talks about this awakening coming about upon the arising of something called the bodhicitta. So bodhicitta translates as the mind or heart that is intent on awakening. So bodhi again, awakening, enlightenment. Chitta is translated as mind or thought or consciousness, but also as heart. So again, in Buddhism, there's no separation between our mind and our heart. And it might be more helpful to think of it as our heart, because our emotional world, our emotions, our deep feelings, our deeper understandings are really important along this path. So we can all become a bodhisattva upon the arising of the bodhicitta, and this guide is what will help us to move towards this way of being, move towards the bodhicitta arising within us. And so throughout this whole theme, we'll be exploring what the Bodhicharyavatara has to say to us here and now in our practice. And as I said, it was written by an 8th century monk called Shantideva, who at the time, people didn't think very much of him. He kind of sat about, he ate food, he slept, he went to the loo, and people just thought that was all he did. And they challenged him to give a discourse, and they thought, we're going to really embarrass this guy because he knows nothing. He just Googles it. No, so they challenged him to a discourse, and in the end, he came along and he just wowed everybody. And mythically, this was said to be he was wowing everybody at the same time as levitating, reaching up and up into the sky, where he then vanished. So this is a mythic story of how much he kind of heightened the minds of all those that were listening to him. So it's a beautiful and poetic verse, but it's also scholarly. And Vidanya has prepared this shortened version for us, which is now available on the website. So if you are on the Facebook group, you can go onto the Facebook group, and there'll be a link to this shortened version of the Bodhicharyavatara. And that's what we're using as our kind of as our text as we go through this theme. So for the first few weeks of this theme, we're looking at a list that's a teaching that's sort of embedded in this Bodhicharyavatara. It's embedded in the first few chapters of the text. And this list is called the Viniyatas. And again, Vedanya introduced us to this in the last talk. So the Viniyatas, and this translates as the object-determining mental events, which sounds a bit gobbledygook, but you could think of it as just, it's how the mental events that we can bring about in ourselves if we want to attain something, if we want to attain a goal or an object, if we want to determine something to come into being, then these mental events are what we need. And as we heard last week from Vedanya, that's whatever goal it is that we have in our life, whether it's to pass an exam, which many of us probably would like to do as we live our lives, rob a bank, not sure if there's anyone here who wants to know that, or attain enlightenment. So any goal, any object, pass an exam, rob a bank, attain enlightenment. So if you're thinking, how do I rob a bank? Listen to Danya's talk last week, and there might be some clues. So this is the list that we're first going through as we approach the Bodhicharyavatara. This is our initial list. And these are the Sanskrit words, and these are the words that we're translating them as. So the mental events that we need to attain a goal are chanda, adimoksha, smrti, samadhi, and pranya. And that's translated as chanda, want, we need to want to achieve something. Adimoksha, we need to decide that we will achieve it. Smrti, we need to remember that we're going to try to achieve it. Samadhi, we need to focus on that goal in itself. And pranya, we need to think about how we're going to go about that. So these are the object-achieving mental events. We need to want, we need to decide, we need to remember, we need to focus, and we need to think. So we're going to go through this list through the first few weeks of the talk. So we heard about chanda and want last week from Vedanya, and now I'm moving on to adimoksha, deciding, today. So I'll just recap a little bit on chanda. So what Vedanya was saying is that we need to have a sense of how wonderful it would be to open ourselves up to the bodhisattva path, to open ourselves up to the bodhicitta, the heart of awakening. So the first stage in attaining anything is to truly want it. We need to really, really want to achieve it. And maybe we need to imagine achieving it, how great it would be if we did achieve it. Maybe we need to imagine that over and over again until it sinks in. And Vedanya suggested that we did this during the week since the last Sangha night. It's in the morning, perhaps part of your morning practice. Really imagine how great would it be if we could achieve our goal. And this really brings in the element of desire and attraction and fascination that we all experience in our lives, all of the time. We can't just throw out desire and think, actually, no, that just leads to craving, I don't want it. We all need to bring our desire onto the path. It's not just what you're trying to move away from in your path, it's also what you're moving towards. You need to be attracted to that vision of what life could be like, how you could be, your potential realized. And I've noticed this sometimes in discussion groups where it's so easy to get locked into this go-round of how much, say, we use technology. Oh yeah, I'm always using my phone, I'm on my phone really late at night. And this is something that I really relate to, it's something that I kind of work with. But once in a particular discussion group with young people, I realized that we were just getting stuck in talking about technology and talking about phones all of the time. And I thought, maybe, and I suggested this, maybe it's more important to just talk about what it is that we want. What is it that we're looking for in that? And talk about that more and bring that into being more. Maybe we're looking for connection. Maybe we're looking for delight or for humor. Whatever it is that we're using that for, maybe we're looking for an expression of energy. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the vision that we're looking for and not the things that's holding us back from that. So that was chanda. And this week we're moving on to adimoksha. Adimoksha, moving on to decision. And this is represented in the Bodhicharyavatara in chapters 2 and 3. And here Shantideva is seeking to help us to move from chanda, from the first vinayata, into the second, from wanting to open ourselves up to the path to awakening, to firmly deciding that we will do what is needed to allow that to happen. So this is decision. We're basically saying, we're firmly deciding, I do want to open myself up to the path. I do want to be realizing my potential, growing and becoming the person that I could be. and now I'm going to firmly decide that I'm going to do what is needed to allow that to happen. And there's a phrase, a quote from a text that I really love called Pingiya's Praises to the Way to the Beyond, where Pingiya is basically praising the Buddha, and it's an expression of faith, an expression of love for what the Buddha represents. And it's Pingiya really acknowledging how strongly he feels for the goal, if you like. And there's this one phrase which is, "Whichever way this universe of wisdom goes, it draws me with it." So whichever way this universe of wisdom goes, it draws me with it. And I thought this really kind of, for me, describes that you're deciding that you will do what is needed. You'll just go where you need to go in order to put yourself in the conditions where the path to awakening can more and more kind of perfume your life. And I think at this point we don't necessarily need to know how it's going to happen. Maybe that will come as we go down the list. You know, we're going to remember that we've decided this. We're going to focus on what actually have we decided, or we're going to think about how can we bring that out into being. This is just knowing that you really want it, and you're going to do what is needed. And I looked up the translation of Adi Moksha as well, the Sanskrit definition. And Adi, I believe, is to do with being the first or the beginning or the commencement of something. And moksha is usually translated as freedom or liberation. So it's like the beginning of freedom, it's the beginning of liberation. So I'm kind of proposing that this word really supports the idea that we really, making a decision is an important step in moving towards freedom and being free. Perhaps making a decision is that first taste of freedom. Yeah. So in the Bodhicharyavatara, in chapters 2 and 3, Shantideva describes a traditional spiritual practice called the sevenfold puja. And a lot of this talk is now going to be describing the sevenfold puja, which is a practice that we take part in as a Sangha, and probably something that many of you have experienced, perhaps many times. Some of you may not have experienced it yet, and so it will just be a case of listening to what I say and knowing that in time, quite soon, there will be an opportunity to take part in this practice together as a Sangha. But the sevenfold puja, it's a practice that takes us through a progressive series of reflections, a series of meditations, you could say. It's kind of exploring different moods that are designed to lead us to firmly decide that we will devote ourselves to our spiritual lives. We will dedicate our time and our energy to our spiritual lives, and in particular to this bodhisattva ideal, to attain enlightenment, to reach awakening for our own benefit, but also for the benefit of others. So it really brings in this altruistic dimension. So yeah, it's leading us to a firm decision that we will devote our time and energy to our spiritual life. And I really like this word devote and devotion, and it might not be that trendy, you know, to dedicate yourself, to commit to something, to devote your time and energy. And I looked that up as well. I'm a bit of a fiend for looking up words, and it comes from the root to vow, that you're going to make a vow. And actually, although I love words like devotion and dedication and commitment, when it comes to vows, I get a bit kind of, it sounds a bit serious. But I think it's important to say that when we do the sevenfold puja, we do it with a kind of a spirit of joy. It's not a somber thing. It's not kind of going, I am going to do this now for the rest of my life. It's like it's meant to come with a sense of joy, a sense of lightness, and a sense of play. So this devotion, it can be kind of through, I mean, it's coming out of wanting something. So it's coming out of really being clear what you want and saying you're going to dedicate, you're going to decide to put your time and energy towards it. So that can be a thing of beauty and a thing of fun and play. So this talk is all about deciding. I just want to say that sometimes people, might find deciding to do things a bit tricky. Sometimes we might be gripped in the hindrance of doubt and indecision. We don't know what we want. Formally, traditionally, the way to kind of handle being gripped with doubt and indecision is just to make a commitment. It's not to kind of know exactly what you need, because maybe that's difficult sometimes. But if you just commit to doing something, trying something and seeing how it plays out, then that can move you out of that kind of like, I just don't know what to do here. And And we have an analogy that we talk about here sometimes. I think Vidania talks about it when we have the mitra ceremonies, which is that if you want water, if you need water and you have to dig for it, if you just dig in lots and lots of different places, you're not going to get down to the water that is below. You just have to commit, I'm just going to dig here and I'll see what happens, and eventually the water will come. So yeah, if you find yourself quite indecisive in life and you're listening to talk about decision making and you're thinking, oh, this is tricky, maybe you can just try just making a commitment, whatever that commitment is, and seeing what fruits come from that. You know, as we all do, I've moved through my life. I move through my life having to make decisions, and it's not always easy. And sometimes I use the word that I'm considering something rather than deciding, because I'm not quite sure which way I'm going. I'm just considering something. But while I'm not ready to yet make that decision. But I think we can still incorporate that into this part of the list, deciding. Because what we're deciding to do here is to do practices that open us up to something higher, open us up to contact with our own potential. So even if you're not sure exactly kind of what you're aiming for, you're deciding to commit yourself to practices that, part of the spiritual path. So that might be puja, which I'm going to talk about. It might be meditation. It might be friends with wise people, talking to wise people. So what we're deciding is that we're going to do what is needed that will open us up to something higher. And that in itself is a decision. It's a decision to allow a higher force to be a component or a steer or an element in the decision that we're making. So yeah, we're deciding to put ourselves into conditions where our higher values are drawn out. And in the Bodhicharyavatara, the highest value is the bodhicitta, the mind or heart that is set upon awakening. And I quite like that we've called the talk Making Our Mind Up, because you could just say that you're just deciding there, but I quite like the word up in that. We're making our mind up. We're trying to really move towards our highest values. And this kind of follows with Shantideva, how he describes spiritual progress through doing the sevenfold puja, is to allow the bodhicitta. He uses languages like allowing the bodhicitta to manifest through us. So it's something kind of beyond us at present. It's something that's higher, and we're wanting that to manifest through us. And he uses language like that of self-surrender. So it can sound quite strong. The word surrender in itself isn't maybe something that we usually use in our kind of modern day language. But we can look at this as that we are surrendering to what's best in ourselves. We're surrendering to the potential within us, and we're letting that come about. It's not surrendering to an enemy or something that you have to be wary of. It's surrendering to a higher value or force. So we're kind of giving ourselves up to that which is higher. We're acknowledging that we have further to go. We want to move from our kind of small, limited way of understanding things to kind of get those small selves out of the way so that we can become more expansive, more open, more receptive to the Buddha, more receptive to his teachings. So yeah, we want these higher values. We're deciding that these higher values will be our guide and will allow our potential to be drawn out by those higher values. So looking more closely at the sevenfold puja then, it's kind of within the context, within this analogy of inviting an honoured guest into our home. So you could see the enlightened mind, the mind of awakening, the bodhicitta, as an honoured guest that we're inviting into our own minds. So we're inviting in the mind of enlightenment. So you could almost see that the Buddha here is represented as kind of coming from another dimension. Enlightenment, the Buddha's state of mind, is not what we usually experience. So we're inviting that in to our mind, into our everyday experience. And we have often these 7 offering bowls on the shrine. And these offering bowls are representing what traditionally people would have done in India when they were inviting a guest into their home. So the 7 offering bowls, they represent the 7 traditional offerings as you're inviting somebody in. And that's water for washing one's feet, water for drinking, flowers, incense, perfume, lamps, and food. So often you'd see those things represented on the shrine as well, like flowers and incense, but the bowls are there representing these traditional offerings. So yeah, this language of self-surrender, you could see it as like inviting an honoured guest. You're kind of giving over your your mind, as it were, your consciousness to that which is higher, to the enlightened state. And you're making offerings traditionally, as would be done when you're inviting an honoured guest into your home. And as we move through the puja, we're going from just inviting this guest into our house, giving them a cup of tea, to actually offering ourselves to that honoured guest, saying, let me help you, let me bring this into being even more in my own life and in other people's lives. So the sevenfold puja has 7 folds. It has 7 stages, and I'm going to go through each of those and draw out the significance of each of those stages. So the first stage is worship, but it could also be called offerings. So as I said, we're welcoming a guest into our home, and at this point we're kind of beautifying the home, which is kind of an analogy for our mind, and we're offering beautiful things to the guest, so that they feel at home, so that they feel that they can stay a while, and they're not going to kind of think, oh, this is a bit of a dingy old place, I'm not kind of feeling very welcome here. We're really trying as much as we can to welcome this refined, exalted state of mind into our own being. So we do this by imagining all the beautiful things that we could offer in our imagination, imagining beauty and offering that. So I'll just say some of the words from the puja. So traditionally it's, we say, with mandara, blue lotus and jasmine. So these are exotic, beautiful flowers that we're offering. Garlands skillfully woven. So occasionally here you might see people being garlanded at times of celebration, a garland of flowers. Food, liquids to drink, lamps with jewels, adorned with jewels. And these are all quite exotic images, and they're maybe not images that we would normally think of when we're thinking of beautiful things that we'd offer. But also in the Bodhisattva, we also have very natural offerings. So we conjure up in our mind things like clear, refreshing waters, crystal mountains, forests, wild places, flowers, fruit, lakes, lotuses, even the haunting cry of the wild geese, which I do hear geese occasionally. So it's anything that you can imagine that's beautiful, that's perhaps quite natural, that you want to offer to this honoured guest. And in our tradition in Triratna, we also have a Celtic puja where somebody's written kind of images that are a bit closer to home, so like the sacred oak and ivy, a leafy dell and a waterfall, great mountains with forests, the sunset, the moonrise, the stars. So anything beautiful, we're offering images of beauty to welcome in the enlightened mind. And then we usually at that point have a mantra. So again, we have a mantra that is evoking the beauty of the enlightened mind, evoking the qualities of the enlightened mind. It might be a mantra associated with a historical Buddha or with another Buddha or Bodhisattva figure, bringing about this kind of the enlightened qualities in a beautiful sound form. And that can really enable us to emotionally engage with the puja as well. And then we actually also go to make our own offerings if we wish to. So we might light a candle or some incense, again acknowledging that there is something here that we find beautiful, that we're welcoming in. And then in the second stage, which is salutation, we make a respectful greeting to this enlightened mind, these enlightened qualities. So bowing is something that is often done perhaps more in the East than in our own culture. So you might put your hands together and bow, and you might see people bowing often as they come into the shrine room, as they see the Buddha, as a mark of respect to the Buddha. And this sometimes can be a bit people feel a bit uncomfortable with bowing. And really all we're doing is expressing our respect, perhaps respect, maybe we have some gratitude. And what we're doing here is acknowledging that the bodhicitta, the mind of awakening, the heart of awakening, is beyond us, and therefore it is sort of above us. It's higher than our present state. So if we think we're on a level with the Buddha, we won't be as receptive to his teachings. We need to acknowledge that the Buddha represents something that is beyond us. And as a marker of respect, we bow to acknowledge that the expansive, transcendent mental states of enlightenment are beyond us. And then we have the third stage, which is going for refuge. So I kind of think of this as like, you've welcomed in your guests, you've offered beautiful things to them, you've actually acknowledged that they're there by saluting them, you've acknowledged, okay, you are here. And at this point, we make a commitment to practice, to move towards that transcendent mental state. We move towards and say we will do what we can to be more like the Buddha, to be more like the enlightened state, to live as they do. So this is a real movement now, a real movement to go towards. And going for refuge is, these are words that we often use, and you could think of this as that all the time, whatever we're doing in our lives, we're always going for refuge to something. We look for something outside of ourselves to give us stability, to give us happiness. And in Buddhism, we can place the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha at the heart of what we go for refuge to. We can place our commitment on the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And through doing this, we can kind of sort of allow ourselves to acknowledge, actually, we're not going to find things that are going to make us permanently happy outside of ourselves. We can go for refuge instead to the highest values represented by the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then we do the refuges and precepts at this point too. We chant the refuges and precepts in Pali to acknowledge that we are making this commitment to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and that we're making this commitment to live in a way that will align ourselves with the truth. So the precepts are helping us to align our behaviour with the truth and allow us to act more and more as an enlightened person would. So that's offerings, salutation, going for refuge. And now that we've kind of really brought the ideal really clearly into our focus, we have the fourth stage, which is confession of faults. So confession of faults. And this is where we're acknowledging anything that's standing in the way of ourselves as we are now and those ideals. And again, this can sound a little bit strong, especially to people who have had previous experience of religion, where there is confession in, say, the Catholic religion. But here, with confession in this context, we're not saying, things that we've done that are kind of bad, that an authority figure might punish us for unless we fess up. It's not about that. It's just acknowledging the patterns and the behaviours that we have that stand in the way between us as we are now and our ideals. And it's just acknowledging that there is pain that arises within ourselves and within other people on the basis of any unskillful act that we might do. That it will lead to pain within ourselves and other people. And it's just acknowledging that. It's acknowledging that I have behaved in ways that were unskillful. And in this stage, in the sevenfold puja, we say, we acknowledge the harm that I have caused, the harm to myself and the harm to others. So that's all we're doing here, is we're acknowledging I have behaved in ways that have caused harm. I'm noticing that, I'm consciously admitting that, so that I can put again these values of living skillfully at the heart of my life. And in Buddhism, shame is seen as it is a positive mental state. And all it is that, again, we're seeing this is where my behaviour is now, here are my ideals, and there's a gap, there's a bit of a space between where I am now and my ideals, and I want to move towards my ideals. So that sense of shame is just allowing you to more clearly see what your ideals are. And through this confession, through this acknowledging, we're purifying any unskillful acts that we've made, we're acknowledging that it happened, and we're looking to act in ways that are more skillful in the future. And this is something that we'll be continually doing day after day as we practice. And it's said traditionally that the more experienced somebody is, the more exalted their mental states are, the more spontaneously they confess. So it's not that they just magically stop doing things that are unskillful, it's just that they see immediately that was unskillful and they acknowledge it spontaneously. So I don't know about you, but I'm often kind of like sitting with things for a while thinking, I don't really want to acknowledge it. But it's said traditionally that the more experienced we are spiritually, the more spontaneous we'll be aware of the unskillfulness in our lives. So then after the fourth fold, if you like, of confession, we now rejoice. So now we notice that there are people that are aligning themselves with what is best in the universe, and that we ourselves also do align ourselves with what is best in the universe. And we rejoice in the success that we have and the success that other people have. And this is actually my favourite bit of the puja. I've seen a lot of people suffer in my life. I'm sure we've all seen a lot of people suffer in their lives through unskillfulness. We know the way that we suffer through our own unskillfulness. We've acknowledged that, but now we can rejoice that there is good done by all beings. That's one of the phrases. We rejoice in the good done by all beings, so that they can obtain rest from suffering. May those who have suffered be happy. And I think this is my favourite because it really does bring out that it is possible to be happy through acknowledging the ways that we're unskillful and then rejoicing in the ways that we're skillful. There is a way to rejoice, to be happy. And then from rejoicing, we go into entreaty and supplication. So here we're expressing our willingness to let go of our old ways of being and to be receptive to new ways of being receptive to new teachings. We want to let go of our old views that are keeping us back, and we want to be receptive to the teachings of the Buddha. And there's a story where if you kind of go for a cup of tea, say, and you put your cup upside down and somebody is trying to pour tea into your cup. You could have a cup that's got tea kind of going up to the brim and then overflowing, and maybe that's when you're quite full of information, you need to go and digest it. Or you could have a cup that's upside down, actually, and no tea's going to go in. So here with entreaty and supplication, we're trying to let our cup be empty, say we're open to the teaching, and we're asking the Buddha for a teaching. And I think for me, when I asked for ordination, this part of the sevenfold puja really came quite vividly to mind. I really felt quite struck by how kind and how wise the people that I was meeting in the order were. And through asking for ordination, I was basically saying I just wanted the teaching. I wanted to know how I could possibly grow more into somebody who is kind, somebody who is wise. So through asking for ordination into the Triratna order, I was just kind of entreating the order to teach me. So yeah, this is entreaty and supplication. After we've kind of purified ourselves, become positive through the rejoicing, we then ask for a teaching. And then we hear a teaching. So if you've ever taken part in a puja, you'll know that this is where a traditional text would come in. So traditionally, it's the word of the Buddha, the teaching that we hear at this point. So it's the word of the Buddha, anything that's kind of either couched within the Pali Canon or something that the Buddha has given us as a teaching. And then after that reading, we would then recite the Heart Sutra in unison. So the Heart Sutra is a Mahayana text that is really showing us how ungraspable the Dharma is, how wonderful and yet how ungraspable the Dharma is. So that's at this point that we recite the Heart Sutra. And then there's the seventh fold. And the seventh fold is transference of merit and self-surrender. So this is the culmination of all of those previous stages that we've moved through, where we are offering ourselves. We're offering the merit that we've gained through our practice, and we're giving whatever we've gathered as merit, as fruits of our practice, we're giving it over in order to enable ourselves and other beings to gain the enlightened state, to awaken. So in this moment, we can see how we've made a firm decision to devote ourselves to the spiritual path for the sake of all beings. So I'll read some quotes from this. So this is from the Bodhisattva itself. Just as the Buddhas before me took up the bodhicitta, so now I too, for the welfare of the world, embrace the bodhicitta. So now I too will train on the bodhisattva's path. May I be a protector for the unprotected, a guide for the lost, a boat to go to the other shore. May I be a lamp for those who need light, and a bed for those who need rest. May I be a servant to all beings. May I be a servant to all beings. So this is strong. This is strong language. It might even sound quite extreme, and it might sound like that's not a kind of mental state that you recognize in yourself, that you want to be a servant to all beings. But at present, maybe we can see this as sort of like a rehearsal. So as we engage in the puja, even if the language seems a bit unusual, seems a bit exotic, maybe it seems a bit beyond us at the moment, and especially when we get to this point where we're giving all our merit over and saying that we will be a servant for all beings, maybe we can see this as a rehearsal. And as we take part in this rehearsal, it's more and more likely that we are going to want to act in that way. And you could think of it as like children playing. So children play it being doctors and nurses, mummies and daddies. And they don't really think they're a mummy or a daddy at that point, but they're playing, they're rehearsing. So that when they grow up, they know a little bit more about how it looks to be one of those things. So maybe that's what we're doing. We're just kind of playing. We kind of, so as we go through our practice, in years to come, we'll know a little bit more. We'll recognize, oh yeah, okay, now I recognize what this is like to want to serve other beings because I kind of rehearsed it previously. So we're playing at being bodhisattvas through this practice of the sevenfold puja. And this in itself moves us closer to being one. Through play, it moves us closer to actually becoming a bodhisattva. It's strengthening that part within us that wants to dedicate our lives to all beings. It wants to dedicate our lives, our energy to our own awakening, and it wants to dedicate our energy to the awakening of other people. There is probably a little kernel of that within us, sometimes stronger, sometimes weak. And through doing the sevenfold puja, we're strengthening that kernel, allowing it to grow. I really like fancy dress, so if anybody ever has a party and they're thinking, what shall I do? And shall I invite Moksatara? Have one and do a fancy dress one, and I'll love it. So again, here we can pretend to be something we're not. I've dressed up as Ivy, I've dressed up as a pirate, I've dressed up as Lara Croft, I've dressed up as a punk. That was my favourite. Some of you might have known me with a Mohican. I kept it for a couple of years. And it was just really fun to play at being somebody different to who I was. And it helped me to connect with the values that were within me. Those values, whatever they were, being Ivy, I'm not sure, nature. It helped me to kind of embody it more and more. So maybe through the sevenfold puja, we're just helping ourselves to embody more and more. What would it be like to be dedicated to our own awakening, to decide that's what's important in my life, as well as the awakening of other people. So the sevenfold puja is helping us move into this realm of decision. And Sting, the well-known rock star, apparently he gets really a bad rep for being really pretentious. But I know this quote that he said, which is that he said, "I don't think you achieve anything without pretending to achieve it in the first place." So I don't think you achieve anything without pretending to achieve it in the first place. I pretended to be a musician, and by that process became a musician. So he's a pretty famous musician, so I'm sure there's probably some pretty famous bodhisattvas who are saying, just do this, pretend to be a bodhisattva, and one day, it'll happen. And we have in our language as well this phrase, fake it till you make it, which I don't really like. I'm not saying it's the best phrase ever, because I think it's a bit too strong, this word faking it. I'm not saying that we need to go around and fake anything. We're just playing, we're rehearsing, we're noticing there's something of importance here, and we're just going to play it, making it the most important part of our lives. And gradually, as we do that, it will become more and more important, and our values, our highest values, will become more and more into being. So yeah, we're strengthening a strand. And we do this through this collective practice of the sevenfold puja. So you can read the Moksatara at home as a poem, you could say it out loud if you wanted to. But here in Triratna, we make it a practice to do a collective practice of the sevenfold puja, where we are saying the verses out loud together, we're engaging in mantra together, we're making offerings together. And this is making these values conscious, making this decision conscious together in a collective environment. And And maybe this is also what we're deciding. We're deciding to become part of a community. We're deciding to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And that in itself is a step towards the Bodhisattva path, wanting to be part of something bigger than just our own selves. And I recommend, if you're interested in knowing more about the practice of puja, Sangha wrote a book called Ritual and Devotion, an Introduction. So Ritual and Devotion in Buddhism, an Introduction, and that can tell you more about what I've been talking about. And we also have, within Triratna, a puja book. So if you went into any Triratna Buddhist Centre, this puja book would be there, and people would be using it to lead these the sevenfold puja. So if you want to know more about the words that we say, it's all here in the sevenfold puja is all there with beautiful pictures as well. So you can see the language more in the puja book, and they're both available. And in the Ritual and Devotion book, Sangha quotes a psychoanalyst, a psychotherapist person called Erich Fromm, talking about ritual and why we might engage in ritual in the modern world. And he differentiates between rational ritual and irrational ritual, and says that rational ritual is shared action, expressive of common strivings, rooted in common values. So shared action, expressive of common strivings, rooted in common values. So this is what we're doing as we take part in the sevenfold puja. We're acknowledging that we have common strivings, we have common wants, we have common desires. You know, we want the higher values of enlightenment to come about within us, within other people. We have common values, and the sevenfold puja is allowing us to decide together that we will do what is needed to bring those higher values into our own being and into the being of other people. We're making those values conscious. We're bringing adimoksha into being. We're bringing decision into being through doing the sevenfold puja. And I'll just share with you an experience I had, which is that once upon a time I was coming to Sangha night, and I didn't know that night would be a sevenfold puja. I just thought I was coming to a talk and was waltzing up to come through the door here. I wasn't waltzing, actually. I was really, really shy at the time. I was really new to the centre. I was probably kind of walking a little bit, kind of, don't talk to me. And I got to the doors and I saw that the cushions had been laid out for a sevenfold puja. And I think there was definitely something on the cushions. I think musical instruments were being placed on the cushions. I think Suramati was placing musical instruments on the cushions, and I thought, oh my goodness, what have I let myself in for here? It's a puja, there's musical instruments, I'm going to really dislike this. Or I don't even know really what I thought, I just thought, this is scary, I don't like this. And we don't always have musical instruments, by the way, but... And I teared up, you know, I was like, oh gosh, I didn't like ritual at the time, I think because I was having an emotional response which I didn't understand. And I nearly turned back, but I thought, no. I stepped over the threshold, I sat down, and that actually turned out to be the first sevenfold puja that I enjoyed. It had a strength to it that kind of matched the fear that I was experiencing, and something clicked. So yeah, the sevenfold puja really can be that moment where we decide to place our values at the heart of our being, at the heart of our lives. We've made a decision. We've moved from chanda to adimoksha, from desire to decision through the sevenfold puja. So this decision, we're making our minds up. That was the title of the talk. We need to make our minds up. But this decision that we're making, it needs to involve our whole being. It can't just be our mind. It has to be an emotional decision. And the sevenfold puja does bring in the emotional aspect to ourselves. But next week, Maitrivasana is going to be giving another talk on adimoksha, where he'll be exploring how we can involve our whole being more and more in this decision. He'll be looking at how Shantideva helps make this happen more and more through looking at chapter 4 of the Bodhicharvatara. So another revisit of adimoksha next week with Maitrivasana. Thank you.